Hey there, folks. Welcome back to the SGDA Summit. We're here with Willem Delventhal, and he is here to talk about how to start an indie micro company. Willem, if you'd like to introduce yourself, feel free to go ahead.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Willem Delventhal. I'm a longtime game designer in the industry. Got my start way back making brain training games about a little over 10 years ago now. And now I'm the founder of the Indie Game Academy, which is an online school for game devs where we try to make things fun and simulate running your own indie studio. I'm an eternal advocate for indie developers, and I'm here to hopefully help some of these students learn how to start their own companies.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Um, why don't you tell us a little bit about the IGA? What is it? How do people find it? And then we can go into your start and how and what you feel is the best, and then we can just go into the talk itself.
Okay, sweet. Yeah. Indie Game Academy. It is, we like to call it a gamified online school for game developers. I feel like gamified is maybe a controversial term, or at least it has a lot of connotations these days, but really all we mean is we're an online school. I'm seeing people say, let's go IGA. Awesome. We're an online school. We focus on interdisciplinary teamwork as well as project-based learning, as well as just making it fun. So we really try to simulate an actual indie environment. We believe that hands down the best thing you can do for yourself as a student when you're trying to learn how to become a game developer, regardless of what path you want to go down, is just actually build and release games. That's that project-based learning we're talking about. So that's really what we do. We run three core programs. The biggest one is our level 3 program where we put students into basically mock indie studios, their own little interdisciplinary teams, and they launch games together under the guidance of a bunch of professional devs over the course of 4 months.
Awesome. Yeah, projects, building games, that's the best way. That really is the best way to both learn and also be able to show off your stuff. Talked about this yesterday during the design panel as well. Um, yeah, one you can tell us a little bit about how you got into the industry, how you started doing game design.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah,
Sure. Yeah, let's do it. I am entitled. I actually didn't. Way back in the day, I wasn't sure I was going to work in games. A childhood version of Willem would probably slap an adolescent version of Willem for saying that. But for a period of time, I thought that games were like ineffectual or didn't like help the world or all the classic stuff that you've heard Saturday night hosts tell you about, and all of it's ridiculous. I happened to get into games basically because I was uncertain of what to do after school. I had studied games for sure. I came away with from school with a management major as well as a double minor in computer science and web dev. And I reached out to my brother, who was already in the game industry at Lumosity, the brain training game company, to ask if they had any open roles. They had two internships. I applied for those two internships. I got turned down. The hiring manager was nice enough to pass me on to the other internship at the same company. Luckily, the one I got rejected from was actually web, which slowly died out over the next couple of years at that particular company. And I got hired on as a mobile intern in their very new mobile games department. So I spent 4 years building brain training games, both for children as well as adults there with them and learning the crafts of game design, etc. And then launched my own thing at that point in time, which was video games for cats using the same scientific rigor that Lumosity was really cared about. It didn't do so well, but it was a fun learning time. And then I launched a more traditional indie game company, which launched a tabletop board game, and then the Indie Game Academy. More recently, I've been a game designer at Together Labs, the people who make ImView, as well as Paradox Interactive for a life sim game that they unfortunately just canceled.
I am so sorry.
It happens. Yeah, for all of those who are students looking to break into the game industry, it is definitely, we're going to talk about it a little bit in the presentation. It definitely can be an unkind industry, but I think as you get a little bit more into it, this is actually my third layoff in one form or another. As you get into it, it becomes kind of normal that these happen. And so volatility is high, but still, regardless, I would never leave this industry. It's like such a wonderful, magical place. Like, I just want to make games, and I don't care if sometimes they don't get released. I mean, I do care, but you know what I mean.
The joy of making games really is its own joy that you can't get anywhere else.
Hmm.
Speaking especially as somebody who also has a computer science background, especially not in like software engineering, there's a reason why I'm here
Yes.
right now. So if you want, you can go ahead and get started with the presentation itself, and then as if we get any audience questions, once you're finished, then we can do those. But
All right, let's do this thing. Can y'all see my screen?
yes, I can see it.
Okay, and it looks
Let
like
me
the
double
stream
check the
is seeing it.
stream.
Yes. Okay, sweet. All right. Yeah, welcome everybody to a little stream on starting your own micro company in games. Oh, wow. So this is about probably just like a 20 to 30 minute lecture, not super intense. The main idea here, what I was trying to put together is basically like, okay, you've been thinking about starting a company, or at least you've heard whispers of it. Here's the basic introduction in how to do it. I'm not going to go super in detail, but I'm going to give you a couple of like pretty straightforward steps so that hopefully it points you in the right direction. So let's talk about it. Games hiring is unfortunately, as you probably already know, kind of boss level difficulty right now, with just about 5% of new juniors expected to get hired in the next 12 months. It is a brutal stat, but it's important to know. Because if you're going to survive, if you're going to be one of those 5%, you have to sort of galvanize against those kinds of stats. But such a time period is also a hidden opportunity, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in the talk. To introduce myself, I think we kind of already did that. I'm Willem Delmenthal, longtime game designer and founder. I love starting my own stuff. I love the indie life. I'm 100% for indie. If you're an indie and you need support, I got your back. I've sort of created this online persona half by accident, half on purpose of this purple wizard, Gandalf of games. So if you need support, I'm there for you. I've got 3 core agreements I ask for anytime I run one of these events. They're very simple. I don't think I even need to talk about them in this space. SGDA is so awesome. But they are, let's make it fun as we walk through today's lecture. Let's have a good time. It's always better to do it that way. We are game developers after all. We're learning how to make things fun. Why wouldn't we have our educational spaces fun as well? Hello, somebody says purple wizard. Let's celebrate as much as possible, and let's be kind and patient with each other. Remember that culture is a mirror. If we're good to each other, we'll get goodness back. All right, so this is going to be not a terribly interactive lecture, but I would love to see some chats going on as we go. So I've got a couple of questions. If you see a question pop up, leave them in the chat for me, and I am watching the stream chat. My first question is, what is your cozy game? We recently interviewed Maria Blaza, who's a longtime recruiter and also a huge proponent for cozy games, and one of her main arguments is that cozy games are subjective, and once you play a game long enough that it's your favorite thing in the world and you could just play it forever, then it is a cozy game. She uses Call of Duty Zombies as an example for that, where if somebody played Call of Duty Zombies enough that it was their comfort, then it would be a cozy game. My cozy game is Slay the Spire. It's not a cozy game, but it is a cozy game for me. So I would love to know you, audience, what is your cozy game as we go? Also, feel free to leave Tears of the Kingdom for a V. Awesome. I would also love to see some of your favorite GIFs and emojis in the chat. All right, so let's talk about what I said. The little bit of opportunity that there is in this kind of crappy time period in the game industry. And then we're going to talk about those simple steps to starting your own company. So in 2023, roughly 180,000 workers were laid off in tech. And honestly, those numbers will probably be higher in 2024. I believe we, in fact, already crossed that number in 2024. Whew, we're all there with you. The nice thing is it's sort of shared PTSD. Jobs are currently more scarce, with more competition than maybe literally ever before. I have the privilege of talking with a lot of longtime game developers. And while people love to say this is the worst year ever, I seem to be consistently hearing that the past few years are quite literally the worst years in games hiring ever, which is depressing, but don't worry, I'm going to bring you back up afterwards. Like I said, about 5% of junior devs are expected to land jobs in the next 12 months. But I don't tell you that to make you sad. I tell you that to hopefully galvanize you into action. And this talk is exactly that action. The main reason that this happened, for those who need the explanation, is exactly that inflection point that you can see on this graph. This graph is how much money the game industry as a whole made each year from 2016 to 2022. And you'll see that from 2019 to 2020, we had a huge boon. We actually had over 20% year-over-year growth in the industry. If you're unfamiliar with what that means, that's a lot. That's like a super lot. An industry that grows 7 or 8% in a year is really good. So 20% is absolutely unheard of. That means for everybody in the entire planet playing games, one extra person for every 4 started playing games just in 2020 for the very first time. That's pretty nuts. But then you'll see what happens after that giant growth period where everybody went back outside because, spoiler, the reason we grew in 2020 is because we were all locked inside with nothing to do except play games. And so as we went back outside, all those extra workers that we hired to handle this are still employed, costing money to companies. And so companies are not hiring and unfortunately mostly laying off as the demand peters out. Not saying that this is the right way for companies to handle it, just explaining why hiring has been horrendous. The silver lining of this thing, though, is AAAs and publishers have a really hard time taking risk, and their overhead is really high. They're costing hundreds of millions of dollars a month to run. Indies don't. Indies cost $0 a month to run, or close to $0. That means that this time of instability is will actually literally have fewer big budget and AAA games released during this time period. For the next 1 to 2 years, we're predicting that there will be fewer big budget games out there, which means higher consumer demand for different types of games, which means actually sort of a hidden opportunity for indies. I spoke with a rep from NetEase semi-recently, and he was talking about how they are literally trying to identify and find indies to partner with because they know that this is about to happen. So despite there being not enough jobs, there is opportunity right now, and it favors the Davids, not the Goliaths. So the solution is like very tech bro avant-garde. Basically, start your own companies and don't let them control you. The instability is partly due to the profit first mindset. If they can make a bunch of money in 2020, even if that means they have to fire a bunch of people for the next 4 years, they're fine with that, right? And so by decentralizing and taking ownership of your own profession and your own money, you don't need to care about that. You won't lay off you. And if we are talking about hiring, by the way, for those who are like, man, I don't want to start a company, I just want to work for somebody else, it will recover. It's just going to take a little while. I had COVID the past 2 weeks, by the way, so I'm sorry if I'm struggling to talk. Christina Marie Drake is somebody that we love partnering with. She's an ex-recruiter from Naughty Dog and just like a very sweet person. She also gives lots of free consultations, by the way, so look her up on LinkedIn. I'm sure she'll help you out. But we asked her this question, will it recover? When will it recover? Her best guess, and remember, it's all a guess, is about middle of 2025. We'll see hiring return to about normal. So that means that for now, until 2025, and really I would guess past that for the next 2 years or so, the age of pint-sized indies is upon us. I released this chart for those who know me on LinkedIn a couple months ago. That's sort of a little hand-me-down walkthrough of how to start an indie studio. And you'll have to follow me on LinkedIn to get it, because I don't have an easy way to share it with y'all. So about 30% of indie games on Steam make over $10,000. And only 7% of games generate enough revenue to fund a second project.
I'll be linking Willem's LinkedIn in our general chat. Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that.
Sorry, everybody, I'm on the mend, but holy cow. All right, I'm going to keep trying to talk. We'll see how this goes. So our top 3 tips normally to break into the industry are these. So if during this time period there's fewer games coming out, and there's not many jobs, and you should build your portfolio anyway, my argument is you might as well start a company, build up that portfolio, and hey, maybe make some money while you do it. All right, I'm going to talk slowly and a little bit calm to hopefully not cough as much. Sorry, I haven't been coughing this much, but maybe I haven't been talking this much either. So here's the steps. Thank you, Anuj. Here's the steps as we see them to start a company. Number 1, if you haven't already, is to learn your tech stack. Number 2 is to find some trusted co-founders. Number 3 is to do legal and foundational homework. Number 4 is to choose a project. Number 5 is to find some funding. And number 6 is to build a game. And then, of course, step number 7 is always profit. So, learning your tech stack, I figure I don't have to tell any of you about that. You're students, you've already spent a bunch of time learning. That's not why we're here. I trust you already done it. Congratulations. Claps for all of you. Very proud of you. Number 2, let's talk about finding trusted co-founders. So for those who know what Y Combinator is, it's one of the most well-recognized accelerators out there. An accelerator is a place for you to learn how to start a studio. And the third biggest thing that they look for is a team that they like. So putting together a team is a huge boon for the potential of you starting a company. Interpersonal failure is the third largest killer of startups. Basically, the founders don't like each other and it falls apart. This is why you should seek co-founders that you trust first. And skills are important, but often you'll grow together and learn those skills over time. So seek these co-founders the standard ways. Go to events, attend classes, join game jam teams, and when you do find those people, hold on to them. They are near and dear. When you're a little younger, you may not realize how rare it is to find somebody that you really like working with, but it really is. So whenever you find one of those people, hold them tight. The sort of 9 major disciplines that IGA focuses on is these 9. And so when you're building a team, look for competencies to cover all 9 of these departments. As indies, we often wear multiple hats. So you're going to find people who are, a little bit of art animation and a little bit of audio, and then maybe one person who's killer at design, and another person who's product and programming. So look for the team that could fill out this 9 at the very least to start up your company. Once you find what you think is your team, start by doing a game jam with them. This lets you prove out that all of you can work together well and that you won't eat each other's heads as you start actually building stuff. And it lets you iterate on the team a bit. Maybe you were wrong about somebody else, or you're just missing some skills that are really important. And every time you do one of these jams, I want you to treat it almost like it's a real product launch. So try to get some hype for it, get some marketing for it, and launch these games. Actually put them somewhere. Just itch.io is a really easy place. And then iterate on that composition as you do each of those jams together. I'm curious if anybody in the chat already has trusted co-founders. I am really privileged that I have a core C-suite on my team now of 4 people at the Indie Game Academy. They're freaking awesome, and I'll work with them to the end of time. So I'm curious if any of you already have some of those co-founders. And then if you believe you do, I'm curious which disciplines you think you are missing from that core 9 that I mentioned earlier. Let me know. All right, let's talk about legal and foundational setup, because theoretically you just found a bunch of awesome co-founders and you're ready to keep going. So my biggest point here is to start with why you want to make this company in the first place. If it's just for money, it's very possible that you can succeed, but a lot of the time it's going to take more than that. Because frankly, starting a company is real hard. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of effort, and a lot of failures before you'll start to see success. And so if you don't have a resilient why, you're not going to make it through to the point where you actually do start to make some money. So a major task of any business is creating culture. Culture leads to consistent employees, to consistent games, and to a consistent market. We know that about some of our favorite companies out there, right? If we look at Larian Studios, we know pretty well the culture in their team. They're awesome people, they're creative people, they just want to make something wonderful, and as a result, we actually want to support them. That's a part of the product in and of itself. John Romero and John Carmack made Doom in a dim cave while blasting metal music. That is not an exaggeration, that is how we got Doom 1. They were just enjoying the culture that they had created on their small team, and that eventually gave us Doom, and we felt that culture on the other end of the game development process, right? That shared vision communicates to your, that shared vision is also something I want you to establish with your co-founders. Oh, you'd have a guiding light together, that why, that you're starting a company together. This helps communicate to your team members, it communicates to your users, and it ensures a consistent product, like I said. It helps attract the right people, whether those are players, investors, or other team members. Creating a mission and vision is an excellent place to start. So when you do have your co-founders, come together and create a mission and vision statement, as well as that why. So like I said, Sven is one of my favorite examples of this, the dude who created Baldur's Gate 3, or at least the general manager on the project. His whole team is just super, wonderful. I got the chance to meet him at GDC this year, and I met a bunch of his team members, and they all freaking love each other. Struggling through, y'all. They're really sweet. They're just like kind of enjoying being together and they're just enjoying building games together. And that's really what it's all about. So find that team, do a couple of test runs with them, and then once you do a couple of test runs, establish that shared why. Why are you even here? Why are you even building games together? What is it that pulls you through? Thank you, Magna Carta. Now, a quick word here on legal risk. That's important for you to all know. Once you do have that shared vision and mission together, once you know why you are building a game company together, I want you to find a lawyer and an accountant. Once you've done a couple of test runs together as well, and talk with them about legal setup. Know your business entities, and remember that I am not a lawyer, I'm an educator. So what I'm saying here is not legal advice. It's just me trying to point you in the right direction, like I said. A lawyer is going to know what you need to do in your local jurisdiction in order to make sure you are legally safe. If you do not start a business entity, you're usually considered what's called a general partnership. And a general partnership has little to no legal protection. Meaning if somebody decided to sue you because maybe your game gave them a seizure or something like that, they could take everything you own, which is really scary and dangerous. So make sure that you are setting up a business entity appropriately, but go talk with a lawyer to get full advice on that. I would love to hear, this is an easy one for everyone to answer, why you want to start a studio. Everybody has an answer to this question. So put in the chat now, what is it that attracts you to starting a studio in the first place? All right, so hopefully now you've found a bunch of really cool people you like working with. You've established some shared values. You've done your homework and found a lawyer. And you have signed some paperwork and actually started the company. Now it's time to choose a project. So let's talk about funneling. Funneling is a really simple concept, and it just means instead of choosing the first cool idea, which is what almost every junior I've ever worked with does, and what I used to do too, instead of just choosing the very first cool concept that comes to mind for a game to build, I want you to actually establish a vetting process. What is it that'll let you choose the perfect game? Hi, Barry. And then follow through with that process. This increases your chances of success by a lot. So this is the concept validation funnel, which is one that I like to use myself and is one you can use if you wish. It's a 5-step process for taking an infinite number of games we could build and just picking the one that fits the situation right. The first thing to do here is to outline your constraints and objectives as a team. What are you trying to achieve? What are your constraints? How many engineers do you have? How much art support do you have? Then ideate inside of that box. Then filter, which are small steps, small easy ways you can remove potential ideas. Then prototype just a couple of really awesome ones. And then once you have a couple of really awesome prototypes, pick the one that stands out. Don't settle for pretty good. Only settle for a concept. Keep prototyping until you have one concept that just clearly is better than anything you've ever created. Then choose that one. Now, I wanted to spend a second to talk about a few indie studio founders that I know of that I think really fill this micro indie company checkbox. Each of them has run a studio that has kept them financially afloat for over 10 years. So they're great people for you to reach out to and ask questions of. They're all on LinkedIn, they're all active. And if you tell them Willem sent you, they'll all be like, oh, sweet. And they'll totally answer questions and chat with you about it. This first one is George Cochran. He's the founder of Juggernaut Games, which is a 13-year-old game studio. Now, Juggernaut, and this is going to be a story that you hear again in just a moment, and is actually usually where I hear indie studios that succeed start. Juggernaut was a contracting firm before anything else. So Juggernaut was doing work for other companies as well as people who wanted game concepts built before they ever made their own IP, meaning before they ever made their own custom games. They did this for a couple of years. Then they launched their first IP, their own intellectual game. It went just kind of okay, which is also very average. Everybody always says that. My first game was fine. Then they launched a second game, which is about to come out, called Starcrawlers Chimera. It's looking much better. But once again, the main way that they actually support themselves, the main way that George has paid himself pretty well for 13 years as a self-founder, like paying himself, he doesn't have to rely on anybody else, is largely contracting work. So that's something for you to consider. This is Joe Kosova, who, this is just like, I think, such a cool story. He's a solo dev, the founder of Puzzles by Joe, and the creator of the Clutter game series, which has, I think, like 16 or 20 games in it now or something. And he's been running this studio for 14 years. The Clutter games, that's a picture of them on the right there, are incredibly simple, but he's developed this fan following of people. So he's an example of an indie founder that never did contract work, but he does pay himself pretty well, totally reasonably. And all he does is he remakes essentially the same concepts with fresh ideas, fresh gameplay, but over and over again to an audience that just grows in size over time. So Joe Kosova is a really great example. Chose a really simple concept, found a formula that worked for people, and then kept building it over and over again. And this is Shaolin Shodan, founder of Masala Games, a 12-year-old game studio, and happens to be the guy who taught me how to code. Shaolin is out in India right now, really smart guy, and finally releasing his first IP, Detective Dotson, which is not yet live, but as far as the stats go, is looking extremely promising. He's been getting interviewed all over the place lately. It's really cool to watch. But just like George here, Shaolin's entire company, Masala Games, for 10 years, was doing contract work for other studios for a really long time. That was how he got work first. That was how he kept his company afloat. That's how he keeps the paychecks coming in. All right. I would love to hear, what is a project that you're itching to build? The bonus question is it actually viable? Because we all have an idea that we would just love to build, but is it actually a realistic game that could make money? I want to point out again that if you do want to start a company, the practicality of figuring out how to make it financially viable first is one of the most important things for you to pay attention to. So picking a project might mean building something for somebody else, finding contract work that somebody will pay you for. That's really my biggest point by talking about these contract companies, even though they are totally indie studios. All right. And the final section here is to find funding. If you have a project ready to go, if you think it's going to be amazing, if you've seen people really want it, the metrics look great, or if you've gotten some contract work, then you've already found funding for it, you're ready to start rolling. So this is a couple of slides from a good friend of mine, Luther Patenji, who is, I think he's currently over at Warner Bros. Games, but he gave a talk for us about exactly this a couple of years ago. So Luther, I have shamelessly taken your deck because it was really pretty, but he's got thoughts on how to find money for your game studio. And here are a couple of his thoughts. The first is what most people dream about, which is crowdfunding, Kickstarter, as well as a few other options out there. They totally work, but the big reality here is that your game needs to be 80 to 90% complete, and you need to already have an audience that desperately wants your game to make Kickstarter viable. About 70% of the backers for your campaign, so if you got 100 backers, 70 of them would be people that you provided yourself, that you already had, that might have already bought the game if you didn't go to Kickstarter. So generally, Kickstarter is more like a storefront than anything else. So the biggest thing for Kickstarter is to spend a bunch of time making your campaign awesome, build up a community before you ever consider going to Kickstarter. If you don't have a community, it won't work. And then actually hit Kickstarter. The next one is investors. Investors can be wonderful. It's a bunch of instant money, but it's also you essentially like hiring a boss. It's you saying, hey, you are going to own part of my entire intellectual property now. That's the biggest con. But if you can find the right person, which you totally can. Some investors suck. Some people are just there for money and can be kind of terrible, but others investors are totally there, are totally partners. They want the same things as you. They believe in your vision. If you have a strong why, they're going to be attracted to that. And they can absolutely be the secret that gets you to the next level of your game development. Of course, especially if they just give you money. Next, we've got publishers. Publishers are largely PR, marketing, and social media help. They're there to help you get attention. The rest is all on you for the most part, and oftentimes they will invest some amount of money when you first work with them. The pros is there's a lot of details that come with launching a game that you don't realize until you've launched it for the first time. A lot of people will say that when you finish your game, you're about halfway done because there's so much that goes into actually launching. And so with a publisher, you just don't need to worry about that anymore. Next time I launch a game with my company, the Delve Bros, my like indie studio, I will absolutely aim for a publisher. Last time we self-published on Kickstarter. The cons here, though, are they still don't know the game as well as you. You're still going to do a ton of legwork, and some publishers do suck, just like some investors suck. So really, for both of these people, just make sure they're the right people. That's all. You're vetting them just like they're vetting you. All right. The next one, which I think is hilarious that Luther contained, is personal debt. Just don't do this. Just don't do this. All right. And the last one is platform deals. Interesting option. There are plenty of other options out there, but basically sometimes people will pay you to launch games on their platform because they're just trying to fill up the platform. A lot of the time you already need an established studio to make this work though. So what I tend to see most often than anything else is people will start the company on the side. So they will be working some other job, like even just bussing tables or something like that, while they run their own company on the side. I do air quotes because we're, of course, spending so much of our soul to make it work on the side. But that really seems to be the most realistic and the most common way. People will be bussing tables or whatever while they aggressively try, with their night hours, with their morning hours, whenever they can, to build up their indie game studio. As soon as you can start finding clients, if you do some of that contract work, that might get you out of that situation. All right, and the last step, because hopefully now you have a team and you've established some great values and you've come up with a great idea and you've found some money, now you just build it. But like, y'all are smart people. You already know how to build games, and I don't need to tell you that. Don't play with me. You should be totally set now. So here are those steps one more time for you. Like I said, this is meant to be a general guiding, pathway to starting your own studio if you're not exactly sure where to start. Make sure you're set up with your own skills. Find those trusted co-founders. Really, like, that trust is the biggest part. Somebody you like working with, somebody you enjoy working with, somebody you know will solve problems with you. Do a little bit of legal and foundational homework. Choose a project, and that project might be just building some, boring contract work for somebody else. That is okay. If that gets you out and going and making money, that is okay, right? That's good. Then find some funding if you can. You might not need it if you're doing contract work. Then build the actual game and launch it. The final word here, this is the most secret piece of advice of them all. This is the one the doctors don't want me to say, is you can do it. It just takes time. The number one predictor of startup success is literally time in the marketplace, is how long you've been trying to do it. And I think that's mostly just because, like, tenacity, eventually the world will cave to you. So if you really want to start a studio, you absolutely can. Hopefully this was a nice little brief intro to give you some perspective into how to do it and how we've seen it happen for people. And that's it. That's my whole lecture. So for the rest of my time, whatever that may be, I can answer some questions.
For sure. Thank you so much for this talk. We've got about 20 minutes. Since we have a break after this, we can potentially go a little bit further. Thank you for this. Was very, very insightful. I actually already have some ideas of friends who I think would be great collaborators for that studio.
Heck yeah. Sweet.
I'll go ahead and ask. We have some questions in our Discord that I'll be asking. And similarly to the audience, if you have any questions, you can feel free to put it into Twitch chat. I'm going to first look at Discord, and then after we answer those questions, I'll be looking at the Twitch chat as well. Just give everybody a chance to have at least one question answered.
Sweet.
From our Discord, we have the question: what are the best resources to find mentors and apprenticeships who will give personalized guidance during these stages of making your own studio? Because it can be easy to kind of find yourself lost in the weeds or off track without a proper mentor.
Yeah. Was the question, what's the best method for finding one?
Yes. What's the best method? Resources and method.
Yeah. So mentors, advisors, all of those people are just people. And I know that I feel like that's a common thing people say, but that's because it's the truth. And the reason that that's important to say is because it's not like there's some like golden gate out there that's like, once you go through it, you find the mentors. They're just people. They're around, they're working, they're a couple years ahead of you probably. But they're just like living their own lives with their own struggles, their own problems, and try to build their own stuff. So the reason that's important is just approach them like anybody else, and just be grateful for the time. What I usually recommend for finding mentors is to use LinkedIn. It's a really powerful tool. Go looking for people who are a year or two ahead of you, maybe 2 or 3 years ahead of you. If you go looking for somebody who's like 15 years ahead of you, oftentimes their advice will no longer apply to your current situation. So getting somebody who's just a couple years ahead is really valuable because they're figuring out issues that you don't even know to figure out yet, and they can teach you exactly that information. They're also a little bit more likely to reach back out to you to accept the conversation. Once you reach out to them, just find them on LinkedIn or wherever. Look for companies that inspire you, but don't go. Oftentimes, if you go to like the big AAA's, the companies everybody knows about, they're getting so many messages they may not respond. So consider looking up some little, slightly smaller companies, but that still feel impressive to you, and then just start cold calling them. Which means send messages to them. When you do so, remain very gracious. Try not to be annoying, and basically just say like, "Hey, I'm looking for advice." When you do ask for advice, it's almost always better to ask for very specific advice. A big open question like, "What do I do?" is really difficult for a mentor or advisor to answer. But if instead you say, "Hey, here's a specific problem that I'm facing, and I'm trying to figure out how to solve it," it does a lot for them. It makes it easier for them to answer the question. And then also it shows that you are already thinking through the problem. For a mentor or an advisor, think about it from their perspective and why they would ever help you out. What they're getting out of that arrangement is basically the feeling of watching a young buck kick butt and rise. So if you're showing that you're kicking butt and you need their help to kick even more butt, they're going to be excited to be on that journey with you. And that's really what they're getting out of it. So be grateful because that feels good too. And just like actually show that you're kicking butt. So every time they give you some advice, show how you've actioned upon it. Don't inundate them with too many messages. Approach fairly casually at first. Ask for one question and see how they answer. Have a little conversation. Then as the conversation gets a little bit more, like if they keep talking with you, ask another question and slowly build up that relationship into an advisor. It's pretty rare for it to just be like the switch flips and now they're your advisor. Instead, culture that relationship over time, and eventually there'll be somebody who's got your back forever.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think this question's been repeated a couple times, and that is, where can you find a publisher or an investor or somewhere, if you have started your own company, where can you find a place to contract for?
Yeah.
Because that's a really good option, but there's not many resources in terms of figuring out where to find that funding.
Yeah, there is no, there is nowhere. There's no like, unless you're talking about like Fiverr or something. You could put up maybe Fiverr work or like Upwork. I'm not sure. I haven't experimented with that. For the most part, though, almost 90% of the time, when I ask people how they get their contract work, it's the same answer. And the answer is I like walked into them at a bar and they happened to mention they needed engineering work. It's almost all just straight up networking, really boring stuff. It's like they ran into somebody who needed project work. For a period of time, when I first got started with the cat game thing I mentioned, that didn't go so well, but I survived for 3 years without a paycheck. One of the ways that I kept myself afloat was I was building games for a pretty well-known audio guy in games. And he just happened to have a personal project he wanted to build. And we happened to know each other from a class we had taken. And so he was looking for somebody to build that thing for him, and I happened to be the right place at the right time. That's pretty much how I find all contracting work gets started, especially in those early days when you don't have a reputation yet. So really, it's about networking again. So go to events, keep your ears peeled, and be open about offering work as well. I'm a contracting firm. This is what we've done already, so do some work. And this is the kind of thing we specialize in. That's one of the big ones. So niche yourself and your contracting firm as much as possible. If you just kind of do it all, there's a million people who do it all. If instead you are really good at one particular thing, that's when you'll start getting work. So try to figure out what your firm could offer that nobody else can, and then just network like crazy. That's really how you find them.
So, yeah, it's important to always remember one of the things that I remember is that the reason why Kingdom Hearts is a thing is because a Square Enix executive and a Disney executive met in an elevator, and
Yeah.
now it is one of the biggest gaming franchises ever. So networking it's hard you can't really overstate how important it is,
Yep.
especially, and it's good to hear that that extends as well towards the finding funding and investors.
Yeah.
Uh, we have a question in our Discord, which is if for those who are making games with the intention of using them as a portfolio, is portfolios who apply for a games job in a bigger company, would it still be valuable to form that micro indie company, or is that more if you want to kind of do your own thing fully?
Yes. Absolutely. So that was what I was trying to convey while I was choking to death during one of these slides. This
I
one.
think it was yeah, that one.
Yeah. um, these are sort of the three like standard tips that we give when talking about breaking into this industry. And you can see here that I put a big green circle around that one, and that's because building your portfolio and starting a company are synonymous. Absolutely, start a studio. There's no reason why your portfolio experience can't be for money, and there's no reason that that can't be simultaneously you building portfolio experience and experimenting with starting your own studio. That's one of my biggest like stances, and I believe in it so hard. While you're doing portfolio pieces, stop thinking of them as portfolio pieces. Think of them instead as commercial releases. Make money from your portfolio pieces. You probably won't make much. You'll make like $20 or $100. But first of all, $100. And second of all, that makes your portfolio pieces far more valuable. They look far more valuable because you're actually going through the experience of trying to make money. You understand the process far better than somebody who just did it as a student project or something like that. So yes, my short answer is yes. There's a ton of work that comes with starting a studio, but you can do it with relatively trivial lift, not too much extra work, and then you can start launching commercial projects. Even if it's mostly just for portfolio, that'll still look so much better on your portfolio.
If I would never, I will for one would never be like, oh, a $20 or $100 bill if it came my way.
Yeah,
And if that
never gonna
comes
say
out
no.
of yeah,
You know what? No, I don't want that $100 bill. You keep
yeah.
that.
Uh, one question that we're kind of seeing between another question that we're seeing between both Discord and Twitch is the question of how long should you start building that community before you start advertising a project
Mm,
itself? Because advertising is hard and it is often of where a lot of money goes. So where can
yep.
smaller studios that don't have that funding yet, how long should they start building that community? And is there
Yeah,
one answer?
it's a great question. There's not really one answer. Do me a favor, look up another smart person. Karina Diaz is one of our advisors at the Indie Game Academy, and she just is like so cool. She's the creative director on Mighty L, who created the Big Con. But so this is like one of my favorite things to talk with her about. In general, it's not quite about how long it takes you, how long you're spending building community, but instead more about what you need from launch. So if I was running a Kickstarter, let's say, and I needed to make $30,000, that was my goal. That would cover production costs or whatever. I'm using it as an example because that was literally how much we raised for Tailmore, the board game that we released, and we needed 30,000 at the minimum because we could ship 1,500 boxes, which is our objective. So set yourself whatever that goal is, and then do the math. It's not that complicated. You can find stats on it for how many people you're going to need to sustain that number, to get that number. So that basically looks like, sale price of the game, or in this case, if it was Kickstarter, the pledge level amount times how many people you expect to actually pledge. And there's like pretty regular math that gets you there. So in general, for every person following your Kickstarter before you launch the Kickstarter, about 10% of them or less will actually back. So like if you've got 100 people who have pledged to back, you're going to get 10 people who actually pledge. And then if your pledge amount is, let's say $20, then you're going to make $200, right? It's a pretty straight formula to actually figure out how much money you're going to make from a campaign or from actually launching a game. So this is a long-winded way of me saying, set an actual number and then go back in time to figure out how many people you need to hit that number. And then however long it takes you to get to that many people is how long you should be building community. To give you to more straightforward to answer the question, I would say minimum like 6 months, 8 months, but probably more like a year or so. to really have a healthy number of people in your community. If you have like a few hundred really active people, like I'm not talking, three people are the ones having the conversation every day. I'm saying like a few hundred people who are really engaging with each other. That's a pretty healthy community and could potentially really help you launch the game. So 8 months or so, if
8 months.
Yeah,
We'll have to write that down, folks. Um,
minimum 8 months.
as we're coming up on time, I think we'll ask a couple more questions from our Discord, and then yeah. So for the first question we have, if I decide to build and launch small games by myself, would it be smart to publish them under my name, or should I create a micro company? And
Yeah.
if so, would I have to go over the legal steps that were described earlier?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I get asked it all the time. The answer to this one is like, it doesn't matter that much, honestly. It matters more about what you care about. Do you care about having the notoriety to your name, or do you care more about having a notoriety to your company? Um, the if you're doing solo projects and you predict continuing to do so, I would probably do it under your name. If you want instead to like build a brand, an identifiable studio, then I would do that. But neither way is necessarily any better than the other. For legal setup, it's really tricky. Once again, I'm not a lawyer and this is not legal advice. But like I said, it's about the amount of legal risk that you are willing to take. If you charge any money for anything, for any service, you are introducing yourself to legal risk. Imagine you made a cool game and you handed it to a player and that player had a seizure. They could absolutely sue you for your game. It'll probably never happen. But if your game really took off and started making money, it totally could happen. So if you don't start a legal business at that point in time, if somebody sued you, you could lose everything you own, to be honest. So it's really about your level of legal risk, which is why I say just go talk to a lawyer because they're going to be able to talk about all this with you much more clearly. I like to recommend that people just start an LLC. They're generally very cheap, and you can run them just like they're your own taxes, for the most part, anyway. And then they give you that legal protection that you need. They really take a lot less. It's way less scary than you think. So, like, just Google it, and within a day and a half, you'll have a company. I'm not kidding. Maybe a little bit more than that, because states take a long time to process. But in a day and a
You'll at
half,
least
it'll be kicked off. Yeah.
you'll have the work done, and then you don't have to like worry as much anymore.
Yeah.
Awesome. For our next question, the question is, the investors come from all sorts of places, meaning if you can dream up an opportunity, there's a possibility to make it happen. What other industries would you like to see cross over with games to create kind of a wider pool of those investors? Because we mentioned Y
Hmm.
Combinator, which is big in tech, but where else can we see that funding come from?
That's a really interesting question. I would love to see games. This is already happening, actually. I would love to see games more in the medical field, and I would love to see games more in the educational field. Those are education, of course, field that I love and care about. And then medical is just one that I think is like we're starting to realize how much potency games have at affecting our mental state. Mental stuff is already actually happening. Obviously, I started at Lumosity, so that was a whole game company, quite reputable, still pretty successful, that just makes brain training games. What is his name? Ryan Douglas is a guy that I've gotten the chance to meet. He runs Deepwell, which is a company all about proving how games can affect your mental state. And they talk sometimes about how we can use games in a couple of ways to help different mental disorders and things like that. So yeah, I think like short answer to the question is I'd love to see games used to heal people, and I would love to see games used to teach people.
Definitely. I've actually heard about Deepwell back, I think, a couple of GDCs ago. I tended to talk by the one of the co-founders of Devolver, who left
Yeah,
Devolver to found Deepwell DTX.
yeah,
And I remember reading about a game that was RX licensed to help treat ADHD in children.
yeah.
So
We
that's
oh sorry.
oh yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say we if anybody wants to like take a gander on our podcast, we interviewed Ryan, who's one of the co-founders. He's not the Devolver guy, and it was like such a wonderful episode. He talked, for instance, about how really the main thing that games do well is they get you to flow state. And the reason that that matters is because once you're in flow state, your mind is really plastic and capable
Yes.
of being influenced. So we've all been in flow state in games where we sort of lose ourselves and we're in this like, you're just in the game, the rest of the world doesn't exist. Once you're there, subtle power of influence can do a lot for you. So his example, I just love how simple this is. His example was, imagine if you got your player to flow state, they were there in that moment in the game, and then you had their character take a deep breath. And that's it. So it's not like this complicated, like, oh, I'm going to influence their brain. It's just like, have them take a deep breath, and that can do a lot to affect us and make and help heal us. And I think that that's so beautiful. Like, that's the power of games, just a deep breath and flow state.
Yeah. One of the games that I'm working on at USC is actually very much based off of that deep breath ethos. So that's
Nice.
actually very cool to hear.
Heck yeah.
As our final question, this is more of a low-key question. What is the last game that you kind of dropped everything for and you just bought it and started playing it?
Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, there have been a couple that I've bought recently. We had a period where we had so many amazing games. Tears of the Kingdom I was super into as well. But man, Baldur's Gate 3. Okay, here's something for everybody. I'm as you get older, you'll have fewer and fewer of those like I'll never forget this kind of game. Chrono Trigger, Mass Effect 3, a bunch of those games for me that like created who I am, you'll find fewer of those over time. So when you find them, hold them dear and like be delighted by them, really embrace them. Baldur's Gate 3 is the first time in a couple of years where I have just been absolutely sucked in. Can't leave. This is just the most wonderful experience kind of games. My gosh, I made an Eldritch Knight character who was supposed to be cool spellcasty fighter, and he just turned into teleport and hammer you in the head, Bonky Boy. And it was great, so
That
good.
sounds that's the honestly like you have one plan for a villain and all of a sudden you find a cool weapon and you're
Yeah.
like, well, I've changed my mind. Get
Now
ready.
I'm teleport Bonky Boy. Yep.
Exactly. Awesome. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap the slot up. Thank you so much, Willem, for coming by and speaking with us. Is there any words that you'd like to leave the chat with before we wrap up for the day?
Absolutely, yeah. As always, I got to give you a friendly pat on the back. The game industry is in a dark hour. It's definitely been a little rough. I think we've all felt it, but there are very few people who are doing it maliciously. Everybody is just trying to do it because they're trying to figure out how to make their own little projects work, whether they are very big little projects or actually little projects. And it's also trending towards the better. As the industry kind of rights itself, we will have a time period where hiring is much more realistic. But during these dark periods where instability is much higher, this is also when new winners tend to come out. During periods of economic downturn, it's very hard for me to be persuasive when I have to take a sip every 30 seconds to not cough. During periods of economic downturn, that's when we tend to get new winners, and that's when we tend to get upheavals in industries. So during this time period, what I'm really hoping for, part of the reason that I gave this talk, part of the reason that I want you to consider starting your own company, even if it's just for portfolio pieces that you're trying to make a couple of bucks from, is because when you do that, you take control of your own projects and your own life and your own financial livelihood. And the longer you do that, the amount of time you do it, the more likely you are to actually make it work for yourself. And even if it doesn't work, you'll have some awesome portfolio pieces to look back upon, and you have some really good stories to tell. So all of you can do it. You can land that job if that's what you want. You can start that studio if that's what you want. Won't necessarily be easy, but that's like kind of the point of a good adventure, isn't it?
That's a great way to leave it. Always go on your own adventures. They're going to be the ones that are the most rewarding.
Absolutely. 100%.
Thank you to everybody for coming by. Thank you to Will for his excellent presentation. Next up, we have a break, and then afterwards, we have our community spotlight for Small Loan Studios. We'll see you all in a bit.
Goodbye.